Ms. Maxwell, thank you.
All right. Can you hear me? Good. Okay, so I wanted to talk about homelessness, and my question relates specifically to affordable housing. The issue of homelessness has, I think, received more attention lately, thankfully, and I think deserves even more attention as an urgent issue in our community. And I know that one solution on the table that has getting a lot of attention as well is the Opportunity Campus. It looks like that is going to get some funding, and we are definitely counting on that filling a need for a permanent year-round emergency shelter in our community, and I think that's an excellent project that is worthy of everyone's support. However, an emergency shelter is not a solution to homelessness. It's a temporary relief for people in crisis. The solution to homelessness is housing, permanent, stable, secure housing. And I think everyone's aware that we have a very serious and critical shortage of affordable housing in our community. Housing prices are skyrocketing right now, and it's getting harder and harder for people with rental vouchers to find places to rent at rates they can afford and who will accept those vouchers. I know that the Kinney Point project is, I think, an example of a great way to increase our supply of affordable housing in Columbia, and I applaud that step, but I think it's just the beginning. It's kind of a drop in the bucket, really, of what we need. So I would like to hear from all of you folks, and tell me about how you will, or what sort of action you will take to ensure that there's a long-term solution to homelessness and affordable housing in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Well, I've been working on this issue since I started it back, and really before that. As I said, I was the executive director at a Habitat for Humanity affiliate in Indiana before coming here, and had worked with Habitat in other ways previous to that. So I'd become sensitized to the needs of a lot of people who need to find a way to get into housing that they can afford, and which, in that case, they can build equity and build wealth. With what's happening with the Opportunity Campus, I was very instrumental in bringing that to pass. We, out of the Housing Justice team for Faith Voices of Columbia, we made a proposal to VAC that they hire someone to manage that project. And in fact, it did work out that way, and a number of our members are a part of the advisory group that's working with them in that. While I was at VAC, I also addressed homelessness in a number of ways by mainly increasing the amount of money that came into our community to help people with rental. We were very successful with that, especially with the outbreak of the pandemic. The amount of funding that was available and that we were able to bring in and expend and help people was significantly increased. The Opportunity Campus is going to be a critical piece of this, and I think it's important, as you've noted, that this is going to be only a piece of that. One of the things that's happened with the Functional Zero Task Force, another group that I was instrumental in getting started in our community, is that group, and I hope you'll explore that a little bit and learn more about what they're doing. They're being successful in addressing the needs of people. We know what works. We know that housing first works. If you put someone into a house and then you surround them with services, then they have the opportunity best to become stable and to move forward. So we need to continue those efforts. In the short amount of time I have left, we need to be creative in addressing the need for more affordable units, incentivizing the construction of those units, addressing opportunities for infill in a creative manner, and looking for ways that we can develop housing that will also be mixed income housing in our community. Those are several of the possibilities that I see moving forward.
So Nick touched on some important parts there. He talked about infill housing in our existing neighborhoods. Talked about more funding for the Columbia Housing Authority. What we have seen in the past is we come up with these grand ideas and we all agree on what it is we're going to do. Implementation becomes difficult because once we start talking about putting affordable housing in a certain neighborhood, there are folks who say, well, I don't want it here. I want it somewhere else. If we're going to have that infill, if we're going to ensure that we are adding that extra funding, we have to find the will to actually do it. Now, I'm the same as Carl. When you talked about unhoused folks in a permanent shelter, I'm the same as Carl. I was a jarhead. I have slept outside in 32-degree weather with only the equipment that the lowest bidder could provide, right? It is too cold for those folks to be outside at that temperature. We have Wabash, somewhat permanent shelter, not really. That 25-degree temperature is inhumane. It has to be raised to 32 degrees. And now once we raise that to 32 degrees, then we need to go in and start figuring out how do we get those folks, as Nick said, the services they need so they can get permanent housing. How do we ensure that they can build that wealth and equity? Because there are a lot of folks in here, I'm actually looking around, whose grandparents and great-grandparents were denied that wealth and equity, and that is now why they may be living on the street. So there's a historical point that we have to acknowledge and figure out as we begin to move forward. It's going to start with funding. It's going to start with the will to actually do it, to follow through with the plans that are on the shelf, as Mayor Oropalo continued to say, that exist already. Do we as a city have the will to actually do it? That's something we're going to have to look in the mirror and actually ask ourselves.
Thank you. So Renee, you mentioned the Kinney Point, and I think it's important. An example there, so that's being built by our Columbia Housing Authority. And I first want to highlight the fact that we have groups working on this. When I was knocking on doors this morning, one person told me, we don't need more coalitions, like we need action. We need people doing the things. And I think it's important to highlight both that there are people working in this space, and the city can work as a coordinator and help facilitate getting the funding there, but also the people coming together. But at the same time, we need the action. So the Kinney Point, I think, is a perfect example because it was actually in like the city legal office for over a year for review and proposals. And so when we talk about these things getting done, they need to get done faster than they are. When I think about infill, I think about it in an intentional way. There's a way that communities are doing intentional infill, where you're thinking about what is the community character that these homes are going in, and how do we maintain that while adding that mixed-use housing. I know there's a pocket neighborhood off Ash Court that's being done by J&K Wax, and they really thought about this as unused land that we could work with together. And the benefit to some of these projects is that they can do them and invest in like green infrastructure or updated infrastructure, so it's not negatively impacting the neighbors surrounding. We have a lot of issues in our infrastructure, especially in the central city, so we need to make sure that we're thinking about how can new projects going in help protect that. And then when we talk about housing on that spectrum, right, there's everything from Opportunity Campus. So I was involved with Nick on, for the Community Health Improvement Plan, where we thought about what are the ways that we can support this and basically take the model of like Welcome Home for veterans, homeless veterans, and apply it to this Opportunity Campus. But then all the way up to how do we actually live in our homes and how do we make sure that we can afford it? And a big piece of that for me and a passion for mine is actually rental energy efficiency, which is not sexy when you're out talking to people about this. But are there ways that we can utilize the funds from the utility to help people pay for it? Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you.
All right, as a creative person, I am gonna kind of blow your all's mind with ideas on how to help the homeless personally. So my ideas stem from both my parents had stage 4 cancer, and my sister and I learned everything we could about nutrition and meditation and holistic health because we wanted them to live as long as they could, and they outlived their prognosis. What I have also found in talking to experts about homelessness is that, yes, there's the person that is in a temporary situation that they just need a hand up, job opportunity, those types of things. Then there are the people that are addicted, they have mental health issues, or they might be in a defiant mindset. So how can we turn those people around? How can we also help people not become a homeless person with those challenges? And so part of the thing that I would bring to the table is nutrition. If their gut flora is not in a healthy state, and you can check it out yourself, like eat fast food all weekend, see how you feel on Monday. Eat really healthy the next weekend, see how you feel the next day. What we eat is affecting our behavior. So we need to look at that. We also need to look at things like meditation skills, stress. A lot of people have had brain injuries that they don't even know about, and that limits their ability to do long-term thinking as far as how they react to something and if they are able to show up to a job consistently and things like that. So I would look at the whole person to figure out how to help the person move up from being homeless and being able to sustain the responsibility of their life. As far as the where to live and things like that, I'm also looking at areas like Ellis. Thank you.
Thank you for stopping, Ms. Heath. Mr. Minshew.
Thank you. So the housing shortage, in part, is caused by interest rates dropping. There's a variety of things happening nationally, but there's also things that happen within our city government that restrict housing starts, that restrict the developments. And so there's always an opposition among certain groups to, well, you can't pander to developers and you can't pander to home builders, but we have a housing shortage, and if a home builder could build a house, seems to me that'd be the group that could help us solve this situation. So to me, when you talk about what would I do as the mayor, I think part of it is engaging the private sector in helping solve the issue. Part of the problem that we've created was with our UDC code, so our urban development, our unified development code, and the things that the city has done to, they call it encourage infill or restrict urban sprawl. But if you can't get people to move out of their first house into a second house or their second house into a third house, that first house doesn't become available. And so, we do home building, house flips. I did 2 houses on Andy Street and 1 house on Jackson, and me and Cindy were both surprised at the people who bought those houses, and the people who never got a chance to buy those houses because of the availability of homes in Columbia. So the city government's not going to build enough houses to solve this. It'll have to be done through the private sector. Homelessness is a different conversation. I got 30 seconds. We're not going to get to that, but the housing crisis could be solved by the city working with private sector and letting them build homes, since that's what we need.
Well, I've heard this answered so many different ways. I'm just going to come at it from just an empathetic standpoint. I've been homeless before. So I've had the opportunity to work my way from the bottom up. I started with the CHA housing apartments, and I worked my way through that system and even got a voucher. And I was able to, while in that program, educate myself and then become a business owner. So I believe that that process works. I also have had conversations with other people throughout the city who are working towards building more affordable homes, like the Columbia Land Trust. They have a plan. We should talk to them and see what their plan is about buying the land, building affordable houses, keeping their overhead down to 30% and allowing that 70% for them to thrive. There's a lot of things that's going on with homeless people. I would say we have to define homeless people, because there are people who are sleeping on their friends' couches who are homeless. There are people who are sleeping at Wabash and other places who are homeless. There are people who are sleeping in hotels that are homeless who don't get counted in this number. But we have to address, Columbia is full of resources, lots of resources, but those people need those resources. They have mental issues, so we must address that. They have the inability to get to not have a job, but they have the ability to get a job, but they may not have a ride to the job or a way. Is that 30-second sign? Okay. Gotta pay attention. But there's a lot of things that the people need. The way to fix the homelessness is work with the landlords who are no longer accepting vouchers because of the pandemic. That's a way to fix it. Another thing to fix is work with that community land trust. Get those people who are unhoused resources.
Thank you, Mr. Lovelady. Mr. Scala.
Yeah, thank you. This is obviously, as you well know, a difficult problem, but we've made progress. If we had we're able to solve it already, we would have. Some of that progress came in the form just this last city council meeting by granting the Columbia Housing Authority $2 million for Kinney Point. That's a good start. Obviously, the answer to housing or to homelessness is housing. There's some other examples that we have in the community. The Cullimore Cottages, for example, Habitat for Humanity. Those are valiant efforts, not nearly enough, but valiant efforts nonetheless. But some solutions occurred to me in terms of zoning issues, and two of them that come to mind. One is we can advocate for smaller lots and accessory dwelling units. That was brought before the City Council, and it was accepted in the first ward, but it was rejected in some of the other wards. I think we ought to advocate for those kinds of issues. That would help. The other is inclusionary zoning. Mr. Thomas got into some difficulty because of some issues with trying to negotiate inclusionary zoning. I think that's an idea whose time has come, and we ought to think about that. That means providing kind of mixed use and all kinds of affordability within the context of even some rather expensive housing developments. There was a mention of the UDC, I think, here in terms of some criticism of the UDC, but the UDC was really created to provide some certainty for the development community. It was also provided to create some certainty for the staff in order not to have to negotiate every single development that came along the pike. But I think probably the most important idea that we can bring to this issue of homelessness and housing affordability has to do with the fact of utility assistance, and I would advocate for increased utility assistance. I do believe that...
Mr.
Oh, stop.
Thank you very much.
I will stop. Thank you.
Ms. Pfefferman, could you close us out, please?
Sure. As I was listening to all of my peers answer the question, I'm really wanting to focus my answer on what City Council can do. Our job is to set policy, to approve a budget, and set and approve a budget and manage the city manager. So when I think of this question, I think specifically as it relates to setting policy and setting the budget. You have to budget for things that you feel are important. I think when you look at a city budget, you can tell where the priorities of a city lie. Part of my experience has come from the last 7 years. I've traveled with a delegation from the Chamber of Commerce to other cities that are very like us, that have handled situations similar to how we are struggling. When we went to Athens this last year, we learned of a really cool affordable housing program that was financed through their housing authority. They were able to do it in a creative way that was not to tax any private entity or too difficult, to make that too difficult. They were able to issue their own bonds, and it was multi-income, multi-use housing, and it was really, really cool project. Another city that we went to is Fort Collins. Fort Collins did limit growth and development, and what has happened, which was very much the direction that we are headed as a city, is their workforce could no longer afford to live in their city. Because they did that, their workforce had to live 30, 45 minutes away. They had increased costs on transportation, and their sales tax was spent somewhere else. So when we think about development, we have to think of the unintended consequences of that, of limiting what that looks like, and making sure that if we have affordable housing, we have to have inventory. And the UDC does need revised. It was intended to be helpful, but there have been unintended consequences from that as well that have kept it from being as helpful as it can. So we need to remove some obstacles and create homes for people. There are 1,200 people on the waiting list right now at the Columbia Housing Authority. Kinney Point is a great start to that, but it's only a fraction.
Excuse me, everyone. Thank you very much.